Tonight we set sail into the dark. Beneath your boots, the ship groans. Its timbers slick with frost, the deck glazed over like a frozen pond. You draw a breath so cold it burns your throat. The same air once swallowed by Viking sailors whose chests rose and fell beneath these same brutal stars. Look around you. Endless black waters stretch to every horizon. Winter stars splinter like shards of glass overhead. This vessel wasn't built for comfort. It was built for conquest, for trade, for survival. And somehow men slept here, in this floating, frigid prison, lulled by the creak of wood and the growl of the sea. You probably wouldn't last an hour, not with the cold biting your toes and waves striking ice into your face, but still you'd try, because something about this world calls you. Now dim the lights. Let the wind hum through your speakers like rigging in a storm. The mast looms above you, the ropes thrumming like harp strings in the dark. There's no cabin waiting, no fire, only the endless sea and the ghosts of those who dared to cross it. Instead, the hull curves low and close, and you see sailors curled like cats against the planks. Their cloaks, woven from coarse wool, serve as both bedding and shield against the icy drafts that sneak through every gap in the boards. The smell of tar, fish oil, and wet rope is thick, and you wrinkle your nose, though you know these men hardly noticed after weeks at sea. Historians agree that Viking ships were marvels of engineering, built sleek and fast, with overlapping planks corked tight enough to ride both ocean swells and shallow rivers. But nowhere in the design plans was the thought of comfort. Sleep was a luxury to be stolen, not granted. You crouch low, studying the narrow spaces between oars, where men wedged themselves like sardines, trying to pretend the sea beneath wasn't soaking through the wood. A quirky tidbit lingers in your mind. Some accounts suggest sailors even used their own shields as makeshift roofing, propping them along the gunwales to block out wind and spray. It sounds clever until you imagine rolling over in the dark, banging your skull on iron rims, and waking with a bruised brow to match your frozen toes. You crouch beside one man, his face half buried in his sleeve, his beard crusted with frost. Each breath fogs upward in a pale cloud, disappearing into the night like tiny ghosts. You wonder, did he truly rest? Or was this only the body's collapse into exhaustion? Historians still argue whether such voyages allowed for any real, restorative sleep, or if sailors lived in a state of constant half-slumber, one eye always twitching open at the groan of a beam or the shout of a lookout. Your fingers trail along the deck, rough with salt crystals frozen sharp as splinters. It feels alive beneath you, rising and falling like the chest of some slumbering beast. The rhythm should soothe you, but your body won't forget the bite of the wind. You tug your cloak tighter, though it's as thin as paper against the creeping cold. You realize then what resilience meant for these men. Not the glory of battle songs, but the quiet endurance of trying to sleep, when the world itself seemed determined to wake you. Nearby, a pair of sailors shift closer together, their shoulders pressed so tightly they look like one bundled form. Shared warmth was survival. One body's heat might mean the difference between waking and never waking again. You hear a faint snore, rough and nasal, and then another cough, a reminder that life at sea was crowded, intimate, and far from the heroic sagas sung ashore. The ship creaks, a wave slaps. You close your eyes, letting the sound of water tapping the hull lull you into a trance. For a moment you feel yourself slip, just as those sailors once did, into the fragile edge of sleep, where dreams were shorter than the winter nights, and every heartbeat was borrowed time. You blink awake, though it is not you but the sailors you shadow. Their world is not made for privacy, not for ease. The low wooden hull groans under its own weight, and you realize how little space exists between the deck where men worked and the shallow belly of the vessel where they sometimes sought relief. Step carefully, you duck your head, stooping beneath the beams, and find yourself crouched in a place just wide enough for bodies to curl side by side. The construction is ingenious yet merciless. Vikings built ships with clinker-planked hulls, overlapping boards riveted together, a design that gave strength and flexibility against swelling seas. You run your hand across a seam, feeling the pitch sealing it, and the texture rough beneath your fingertips, but as clever as the structure was, it left no thought for creature comfort. Sleep here meant twisting yourself into knots, pressing against cold oak ribs that felt more like a coffin than a bed. The air grows damp and heavy, for water always finds a way inside. Your nose picks up the scent of mildew, fish oil, and human sweat trapped in this low space. A mainstream fact tells you Vikings rarely built permanent sleeping quarters. Even their larger longships held no dedicated bunks. Instead, men sprawled wherever the curve of the hull permitted, sometimes stretching on top of their sea chests, using them as both storage and stiff mattresses. And yet, there's an odd detail whispered in a saga. Some claim certain crews stretched canvas tarps between the ribs of the hull, fashioning hammocks of sorts. If true, this would have been a rare luxury, a sway within a sway, the body rocking with ship and canvas at once. But historians still dispute whether such contraptions truly existed on Viking ships or were later embellishments borrowed from Mediterranean accounts. You smile at the thought, half innovation, half tall tale, because sleep always seems to invite exaggeration. Here, though, nothing feels exaggerated. You crouch lower, your breath fogging as you watch a sailor worm into a corner, pressing his shoulder against the hull, knees pulled tight. He adjusts his cloak, tries to ignore the drip of condensation falling rhythmically from the beams overhead. He mutters something under his breath, perhaps a curse at the sea, perhaps a prayer. His neighbor stirs, rolling toward him, and now two men's cloaks overlap, forming a crude barrier against drafts. Quirky as it sounds, some sailors carve notches into the wood, little grooves for their hips or shoulders to settle, like squirrels hollowing a nest. You run your finger along one such groove, wondering how many nights it took to wear the pattern, and how many different backs fit the same hollow. The ship shudders. Above, a rope creaks as though strummed by invisible fingers. The men do not stir. Their exhaustion is heavier than the waves. You sense it yourself, the way the body shuts down when there is no other choice. And yet, even here, alertness lingers. One man's hand rests near the handle of his axe, his fingers curling around it even in half-sleep. Another shifts as though listening to the groan of timbers, ready to rouse at a cry from the deck. You press your palm to the hull. The cold seeps in, straight through your skin, and you understand that no place inside this vessel is safe from the sea's touch. Still, the men make do. Still, they carve out nests in corners, lie atop boxes, wrap themselves like mummies in cloaks. Still, they close their eyes for minutes or hours, finding rest in defiance of the wind's whistle and the water's gnaw. You shuffle forward, and the space narrows again. It feels less like a ship now, and more like a cave carved by human stubbornness. Yet in this cave, Voices sometimes rose soft and low, a hum, a murmur, perhaps a fragment of a saga spoken before sleep. And there, in the half-dark, with frost creeping down the beams and rats skittering along the planks, the Vikings slept poorly, restlessly, but enough to keep going another day. You slide along the damp deck, your shoulders brushing rough timbers as you crouch closer to a man swaddled in wool. The fabric scratches his cheek, thick but coarse, the sort of blanket that never quite feels gentle. Still, it is all he has, and in this bitter air, every fiber matters. You notice how the cloak doubles as bedding, as shield, as winter coat. In this place there is no separation between day and night. Clothes what you wear is what you sleep in. Archaeological finds from graves across Scandinavia tell us cloaks were staples of Viking attire, woven tight and often waterproofed with lanolin from the sheep themselves. It explains why even soaked cloaks could keep a layer of warmth trapped close to the body. You tug at the edge of one such covering. Its smell earthy and faintly oily, as though the sheep's presence still lingers. That sheep, in a strange way, is still protecting its shepherd at sea. One curious detail stands out from certain sagas. Sailors sometimes line their cloaks with bits of fur stitched inside, not for beauty but to soften the bite of the wool. Imagine lying night after night in something prickly, until one day you tuck scraps of rabbit or fox inside to make your own bedding. It feels almost domestic, almost tender, though the setting is anything but. And yet debates persist about whether such cloaks were enough during the harshest nights. Some historians argue the combination of icy winds and sea spray would have made wool inadequate alone, while others point to Viking resilience, noting the cloak's clever we've repelled more dampness than we give it credit for. You watch a sailor curl tighter beneath his, the cloth pulled over his head like a cocoon, and you wonder if warmth was real or only imagined. The night stretches on. Your ears catch the steady groan of the mast overhead, its ropes singing a high note in the wind. Beneath that, the rustle of cloaks as men shift, seeking comfort that never fully comes. One man pulls his garment so close it hides even his beard, leaving only a faint puff of breath escaping at the edge. Another lies flat with cloaks spread wide, as if daring the cold to try. A rather odd practice is whispered in folklore. Some crews supposedly soaked their cloaks in seawater, let them freeze stiff on the deck, then crawled beneath them like a hard shell. It sounds absurd. Why make yourself an icy tomb? Yet the logic was to block the wind completely, the frozen fabric forming a barrier. Whether myth or truth, you picture it and shiver, because in desperation strange experiments become believable. The smell of lanolin and damp fur hangs in the air. Your fingers brush one cloak, and you're surprised how heavy it feels, waterlogged and dense, pressing against the body like a sandbag. The sailor beneath stirs, half-conscious, shifting his shoulders to ease the weight. You wonder if the cloak gave him rest or simply another burden to bear. Remember this: wool was wealth. To own a thick cloak was not guaranteed. It represented flocks tended, looms worked, hands calloused by spinning. On board it became the thin line between life and frostbite. The hum of the ship reminds you that luxury here is not gold or silver, but a blanket rough as bark. Still, the mind drifts. Even as sailors cocooned themselves, dreams rose unbidden. Perhaps they pictured fields where sheep still grazed, or the hearthside where their mothers once folded blankets around them. Perhaps, as the cloak muffled the creak of timbers, They forgot the sea for an instant and remembered the smell of home. But the sea always returns. A wave slaps the hull, spraying mist that seeps into fabric. You feel it, two cold needles stabbing through wool, shocking the skin awake. The sailor groans, pulls his blanket tighter, though both of you know it will never fully keep the sea out. And yet for another hour, another moment, he tries to let the heaviness of wool trick his body into sleep. The truth is plain. Sleep aboard a Viking ship was never comfort, only survival. And tonight, as you tuck yourself beneath a scratchy cloak, you begin to understand the cost of every shiver, every stolen breath, every restless dream. You turn your gaze from the rough wool cloaks to the bodies lying beneath them. It strikes you that the warmth they relied on wasn't just in the fabric, but in one another. When the wind cut through every seam and the planks leaked icy mist, the only defense left was human closeness. You picture the crew arranging themselves shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, a heap of limbs and cloaks pressed together like logs stacked to keep a fire smoldering. It is well established that Viking sailors rarely slept alone during winter voyages. The cold could be lethal, and there was no shame in sharing warmth. You watch as two men shift closer, cloaks overlapping until they form a single mound, their breaths mingling in visible clouds. It is practical more than affectionate, though after weeks on open water perhaps bonds blurred between necessity and friendship. One curious practice is recorded in oral tradition. Some crews deliberately paired younger men with older, so the vigor of youth could bolster the frilier bodies, and in return the elders offered seasoned knowledge of how to ride out the cold. It wasn't about comfort as we understand it, but survival strategies hidden within sleeping arrangements. You can almost see the pairs forming instinctively, like birds tucking together in a storm. Scholarly debates continue about whether this habit was universal or merely occasional. Some point to the lack of explicit written records as proof that huddling was too ordinary to mention, while others suggest it was ritualized, perhaps even assigned by rank or kinship. Not all experts agree, but your eyes on the scene make the truth self-evident. In freezing darkness, closeness meant life. You crouch lower, hearing the shuffle of cloaks. A sailor mutters in his sleep, his hand fumbling to pull another's arm over him like an extra blanket. The smell is heavy, unwashed wool, sweat and salted fish clinging to every fold, but the warmth beneath it is real. You feel your own shoulders relax, lulled by the steady heat radiating from so many bodies sharing one tight space. It's strange, isn't it? The image of hardened warriors, men famed for raids and battles, reduced at night to a heap of shivering bodies clinging together. Yet this is often how history humbles us, heroes by day, vulnerable sleepers by night, and in this vulnerability they became more human. You picture the clumsy nudges, the elbows jabbed in ribs, the muffled curses when someone rolled too far or pulled the cloak unevenly. Small irritations, yes, but irritations preferable to freezing. There's an odd story told in later folklore of a crew who insisted on singing before lying down together, a low chant that set their breathing in rhythm. Once the song ended, they collapsed side by side, their snores falling into the same tempo, as if the music lingered in their lungs. Whether exaggerated or not, you almost hear the faint hum beneath the creak of timbers. You touch the deck, feeling it vibrate with their weight. The boards are damp, icy against your palm, yet warmed slightly by the bodies curled above. That faint warmth reminds you that survival aboard these ships was not only about shields and axes, but about skin pressed to skin, heat passed from chest to chest. Your own body begins to mirror theirs. You tuck your knees close, shoulders hunched, imagining how you might fit between two of them. Would you grumble at the smell? Perhaps. But after hours in the biting wind, perhaps you'd be grateful for any warmth, even from a stranger's breath against your cheek. Not all men welcomed this intimacy. Some sagas hint at sailors stubborn enough to lie apart, claiming independence, only to crawl back shivering before dawn. The lesson came swiftly. Pride freezes faster than skin, and so night after night the human bundle returned. Cloaks spread, bodies overlapped, the sea endured together. Outside, the wind howls like a wolf circling prey. Inside, the crew sleeps, knotted together in defiance, and you, nestled invisibly among them, feel for the first time the comfort of their closeness, rough, awkward, but utterly necessary. The night stretches on, and your gaze drifts upward toward the great canvas billowing above. The sail looms like a massive breathing creature, swelling and sighing with every gust. You lie back for a moment, the planks of the deck pressing into your shoulders, and you realize how often sailors try to rest beneath those shifting wings. It seems dangerous at first. Who would dare sleep under a thing that could drop its ropes or snap in the storm? Yet when options were few, even a shadow from the sail offered some relief. We know from ship reconstructions that Viking sails were immense, often woven from thick wool treated with animal fat or tar, to resist wind and water. They were heavy, sometimes weighing more than a dozen men could carry when dry, and even more when soaked. For sailors, that mass overhead wasn't just propulsion, it was shelter. By sprawling beneath the angled canvas, they could shield themselves from sleet and spray, a fragile roof in an otherwise roofless world. One intriguing claim in folklore tells of sailors stretching spare canvas or hide between the mast and gunwales to form a kind of makeshift tent. Imagine crawling under that damp canopy, listening to the wind hammer above, while drops of tar-scented water pattered down around you. It wasn't cozy, but compared to lying exposed on open boards, it must have felt like crawling beneath heaven's own cloak. Researchers remain uncertain whether such sheltering was common practice or an occasional improvisation. Some argue the danger of ropes snapping or sails collapsing would have discouraged men from lingering beneath them, while others counter that exhaustion makes men gamble with risks. After all, when your eyes are closing of their own weight, safety becomes an abstract thought. You roll to one side and watch a pair of sailors claim a patch of deck directly under the mainsail. They press their backs to the mast, letting it serve as a wall, while the canvas blocks some of the cold mist blowing in. Their cloaks lie open now, capturing any hint of still air. The mast creaks above them, wood groaning as though it too longs for rest. A curious observation comes to you. The sound of the sail flapping may have lulled men the way curtains in a cottage flutter at night. For modern ears it's harsh, a whip crack and thunderclap rolled together, but for them it became background noise, a steady pulse against which sleep might come. You notice your own eyelids flutter as the rhythm repeats, wave after wave, gust after gust, like a lullaby only the sea can sing. Of course, the risks never vanished. A sudden gust could snap a rope, sending a line slashing down dangerously close. There are accounts of sailors struck by gear while sleeping near the rigging, and you can't help but wonder how many men woke, startled, scrambling from beneath the sail when storms broke. Even so, the fact remains. They return there again and again. The lure of partial shelter outweighed fear. One almost comical image lingers in your imagination. Sailors jerking awake to find drops of tar or sheep fat dripping onto their foreheads from the treated cloth above. You smirk at the absurdity, though for them it was no joke. Clothes ruined, hair sticky, eyes stinging. Still, they endured because even a messy roof was better than no roof at all. As you lie beneath the imagined sail, your senses fill with the scene. The smell of tar is thick, mingling with salt and sweat. The canvas rustles like a drumskin played by invisible hands. The mast hums low with each shudder of rope, a bass note under the high cry of the wind. You feel the deck tilt and sway, yet the angled canvas shields your face from spray, and for a moment you understand the relief these sailors sought. Think of it, men who raided across seas, who braved storms and battles, reduced at night to hiding like children beneath a giant blanket. And in that hiding they found moments of stillness, of respite. Their sleep was never full, never dreamless, but it was enough to trick the body into carrying on. Your eyes drift shut again, though your ears stay tuned to the creak, the flap, the endless groan of timbers. You let yourself sink into the planks, pressed flat against the ship's heart, and the sail above becomes your roof as it once was theirs. The night deepens, and you notice how every breath curls into mist. The air is so cold that the simple act of exhaling paints a little ghost before your face, rising, fading, and vanishing into the dark. You glance around and see the same pale clouds puffing from the sailors as they doze. The deck seems haunted by these fleeting shapes, a quiet congregation of vapor spirits that live only a heartbeat long. Archaeological evidence reminds us that Viking voyages reached as far as Greenland and the icy coasts of North America, so the winters they faced were no mild inconvenience. The biting air froze water in the beard, turned hair stiff as straw, and left every plank slick with frost. You crouch and touch the deck, your fingertips stick momentarily to the wood. So sharp is the cold. It's a world where breath itself feels like proof of survival. One curious detail emerges from sagas and later retellings. Sailors sometimes joked that their souls left their bodies with every exhale, wandering out into the night before slipping back in. Perhaps it was only gallows humor, or perhaps it was a way of explaining the shimmering fog that clung around sleeping men like a second skin. You picture the jokes whispered through chattering teeth, grim silly, but a reminder of how closely life and myth touched on these ships. Modern scholars continue to puzzle over just how sailors endured such conditions without fire. A hearth might have warmed a hull on land, but here a single spark could doom the vessel. Some argue they relied entirely on body heat and wool, while others believe small braziers may have been used in the most desperate moments. No consensus exists, and so the image of frozen breath remains a stark mystery. How did men drift into dreams when the very air threatened to rob them of life? You shift closer to a row of huddled figures. Their faces shine faintly in the moonlight, their eyes closed, but their lips move as if muttering even in sleep. Frost gathers at the corners of beards, tiny icicles that rattle when they stir. You imagine waking with your mustache frozen together, tugging painfully when you open your mouth. The discomfort is almost funny until you remember these were nights repeated endlessly. Not once, not twice, but for weeks at sea. One odd practice sometimes mentioned in folklore was the rubbing of snow across the face before lying down, as though numbing the skin might dull the sensation of cold and allow sleep to come quicker. You wince at the thought, voluntarily freezing yourself to trick your mind into ignoring frost. It feels like madness, and yet desperation breeds odd solutions. The sounds around you grow sharper in the brittle air. Every groan of timber cracks like ice snapping. The faint squeak of a rat under the planks carries fire in the silence. Even the creak of boots above echoes as if the entire sea were listening. The cold amplifies, sharpens, and draws attention to details you'd normally ignore. And in this heightened stillness, the sailors dream. Perhaps they dream of fireside feasts, of hearth smoke curling upward in a warm hall. Perhaps their visions are of sunlit fields where their breath no longer clouds the air. Or perhaps, as the sagas sometimes hint, they dream of icy giants and frost spirits walking alongside the ship, their presence both feared and revered. You imagine waking in a start, uncertain if the frost on your beard is only weather or a sign that something mythical has brushed close. Your own lungs ache with each inhale, the air so sharp it scrapes your throat. You wrap your arms around yourself, mirroring the sailor's posture, and realize how much energy it takes simply to breathe here. Sleep in such a place is no indulgence but a gamble. Close your eyes too long, let your breath slow too deeply, and perhaps you never wake. Yet they did wake again and again. The evidence lies in the very fact we speak of them now. Their frozen breath was a constant reminder of danger, but also of life continuing, of chests rising against the odds. And so, as the ship rocks gently and mist swirls in the moonlight, you settle down, watching the pale ghosts of air until your eyes grow heavy. You stretch your fingers across the planks and notice the faint texture of something draped over a sailor's shoulders. It isn't wool this time. It is heavier, smoother, with a faint smell of barnyard and musk. Animal hides. You lean closer, catching the sheen of fur glinting under moonlight. The hide is stiff from salt spray, yet it lies thick enough to muffle the bite of the wind. It is well established from burial finds and saga references that Vikings carried animal skins on long journeys, not only as trade goods, but as practical layers of insulation. Cattle hides, reindeer skins, even bear pelts were hauled aboard, each pressed into use when the winter seas grew merciless. You imagine crawling beneath such a pelt, the coarse hair scratching your chin, the smell both comforting and offensive. A curious observation lingers in Norse folklore. Some sailors swore by sleeping with the fur side in, pressing the soft down against the skin, while others insisted the fur should face outward to trap heat. You picture arguments on the deck, one man turning his hide this way, another insisting otherwise, each convinced his method was the wiser. It seems trivial, almost comical, but when nights meant the difference between frostbite and survival, even the direction of a pelt mattered. Researchers remain divided over just how plentiful these hides were on ships. Some point to sagas describing warriors wrapped in furs as proof they were common, while others argue hides were bulky and space aboard was precious. Not all scholars agree, but your senses fill in the gap. Here, on this creaking deck, the hides are present, their odors mingling with tar, sweat and salt to form a pungent cloud. You shift nearer, pressing your own cheek against the imagined pelt. It is cold at first, stiff with salt, but as your warmth seeps in, the fur softens, pliable, and a faint coziness steals through you. This small relief feels enormous in a world of icy breath and splintered wood. You understand why sailors treasured hides not only for trade, but for nights like these, when their bodies begged for warmth. One odd tidbit preserved in a later Icelandic tale claims that sealskins were prized as the ultimate bedding at sea, though they smelled so strongly of fish that only the most desperate could endure them. You almost laugh, imagining men gagging as they buried their noses under reeking pelts, only to sigh in relief when the warmth outweighed the stench. The sounds of the ship shift as you rest under the hide. The creak of timbers is muffled, dulled, as though you've crawled inside a cave. The pelt absorbs sound, turning the world quieter, gentler, though the rocking remains constant. You hear a sailor's teeth chatter nearby, and then the subtle hush when his neighbor shifts his fur over them both. For all its awkwardness, this practice forges bonds as real as battle comradeship. Your mind drifts with theirs. Did they dream of the animals whose skins they wore? Perhaps visions of herds across snowy fields, or hunts remembered in detail. Or perhaps they dreamed of the bargains struck, the trade posts where hides were swapped for silver. The connection between land and sea never left them, even on open water. The smell of cowhide or reindeer fur carried the echo of farms far behind. You tug the hide closer, letting the coarse hair scratch your chin, and realize it isn't luxury but survival. There is no warmth without this stolen lair, no comfort without this reminder of land. It is harsh, unromantic, and yet strangely intimate, a pact between sailor and beast that death has already sealed. The night rolls on, the ship sways, and under fur and hide, the Vikings steal a few more hours of uneasy slumber. You lie with them, wrapped in musk and memory, drifting into the same uneasy dreams. You notice a faint clatter near the mast, not the noise of ropes or wood, but the sound of men fumbling with bowls. Before sleep, food must come first. You draw closer, watching sailors squat in the dim light, their cloaks wrapped tight while they cradle small wooden vessels. Inside lies something humble, dry fish softened in water, porridge made from barley, perhaps a chunk of hard bread softened with broth. It isn't much, but it's enough to quiet hunger before they curl into uneasy rest. Archaeological finds from Viking settlements confirm that dried fish, salted meat, and hard bread were staples on voyages. These were foods designed to last, impervious to mold and spoilage, even if they became harder than stone over time. You picture a man gnawing at a strip of fish, its salt burning his tongue, then chasing it with a mouthful of cold water. The taste is bland, but the warmth that follows is what matters. The body needs fuel to endure the cold. One curious detail emerges from sagas and later retellings. Some crews believed it was bad luck to go to sleep on an empty stomach at sea, as it left the spirit restless and vulnerable to nightmares. So, even when rations ran thin, sailors forced themselves to nibble something, no matter how small. You imagine men passing a single dried herring between them, each taking a bite before settling down, half ritual, half superstition. Scholars remain divided on whether warm meals were ever prepared aboard ships during voyages. Some argue small cooking pits lined with sand might have been used on calmer waters, while others insist the risk of fire was too great. The debate leaves room for speculation, and you consider the possibility of men sipping lukewarm gruel from a carefully guarded ember. Whether real or imagined, the idea adds a layer of comfort to an otherwise bleak night. You crouch beside a sailor slurping quietly, his lips red from salt, his hands trembling with fatigue. He finishes and wipes the bowl with his cloaked sleeve, then tucks the vessel under his chest as though protecting treasure. Another man mutters a prayer to the gods, thanking them for the meal, small though it was. You sense how the ritual of eating connected them not only to survival but to faith, binding body and spirit for the night. An odd anecdote floats into your mind from folklore. Sailors sometimes carried dried onions and garlic, biting into them raw before sleep, believing the pungent breath kept sickness away. You smirk at the thought of a dozen men packed together, cloaks drawn tight, breathing out clouds of onion fumes. Yet in their minds it wasn't just food, it was protection, a barrier against unseen ailments. The sounds of eating fade, replaced by sighs of satisfaction and the shuffle of cloaks as men settle in. You feel the change yourself. The ship seems quieter, calmer, as if the meal has lulled both crew and vessel into momentary peace. The salt still lingers in your mouth, sharp and metallic, but your stomach feels fuller, warmer. The rocking of the ship grows gentler as you watch the men drift toward rest. Their bellies, however meagerly filled, are now anchors against the cold. Dreams come easier after food, and though the porridge was watery, though the fish was tough, the ritual of eating has prepared them to surrender to sleep. Think of it, men who had fought, rowed, and endured storms, now depending on a scrap of bread to carry them through the night. It humbles you, reminding you that survival often rests on the simplest acts, chewing, swallowing, sighing with relief. And so you too imagine finishing a small ration, your hands warmed by the bowl, before lying back and letting slumber take hold. You linger near the row of bundled sailors, and something catches your eye, the glint of iron in the half-dark. It is no loose tool or random scrap, but a weapon, an axe, its blade tucked close to a man's side. You glance further, and notice spears stacked nearby, their shafts braced against the planks. Even as they sleep, the crew never truly parts from their arms. Rest is taken with steel within reach, a reminder that safety at sea is never guaranteed. Contemporary accounts from enemies of the Norsemen often mention this vigilance, describing raiders as men who could leap awake with blades in hand in the span of a heartbeat. It was not merely bravado but necessity. Pirates, rival crews, and even storms demanded readiness at any hour. To be caught unarmed while asleep was to invite disaster. You see it now, hands curled instinctively around hilts, fingers twitching even in dreams, as if their bodies refused to forget the threat. One rather peculiar detail appears in later chronicles. Some warriors were said to sleep with weapons strapped to their wrists, so they could not be knocked aside by accident. Imagine lying down, cloak wrapped tight, with a knife tied to your arm. Uncomfortable, perhaps, but the reassurance must have outweighed the inconvenience. You can almost hear the quiet jangle of metal each time the men stir. Not all experts agree on how widespread this practice was. Some historians argue that weapons stored loose in piles would have sufficed, while others believe the culture of readiness was so ingrained that warriors treated their axes like pillows, never letting them out of arm's reach. The absence of concrete evidence leaves the matter unresolved, but as you watch the crew sleep braced against steel, the choice seems obvious. Vigilance was as vital as warmth. You crouch nearer one man, his head resting against the haft of a spear. The wood is worn smooth, darkened from years of handling. His breath rasps, a tired snore, yet his arm remains hooked over the shaft, as though even in dreams he will not release it. Another man has tucked his axe beneath his chest, the iron blade pressing cold against his ribs. You shiver at the thought of such discomfort, yet for him it is security. An odd memory surfaces from saga literature, a tale of a warrior who awoke so violently during a raid that he swung his axe before fully conscious, striking the mast instead of an enemy. The crew supposedly laughed, calling him Dream Fighter, though the splintered would told a more dangerous story. It illustrates how thin the line was between sleep and wakefulness, how the mind never truly rested when danger lurked. The ship creaks, and you imagine how every sound might stir these men. The slap of water against the hull, the squeal of rope, even the sigh of the wind, all could be mistaken for threats. Sleep in such conditions was light, fractured, easily broken by the echo of potential attack. You sense it yourself, your own body tensing at each noise, never fully surrendering to rest. Weapons besides sleepers also served another function: morale. To a Viking, strength and readiness were core to identity. Even in sleep, to be pictured with axe in hand was to remain a warrior. Perhaps it comforted them, a reminder that they were never helpless, never truly defenseless, no matter how harsh the sea. The smell of iron, faintly metallic, mingles with the salt air. It tickles your nose, sharp and unpleasant, but grounding. You glance at the cluster of weapons blades, dull with rust spots, spears bristling like thorns, and realize this was as much a part of their bedding as cloaks or hides. The sailor did not choose between warmth and vigilance. He clung to both, sacrificing softness for safety. You close your eyes and imagine lying there yourself, axe beneath your hand, cloak over your chest, the ship rocking beneath. You sense the paradox, comfort found not in letting go, but in holding tighter, even in dreams. The sea rocks beneath you, not violently, but with a rhythm steady enough to lull. The hull rises, then dips, each motion a slow sigh, like the breathing of some giant slumbering creature beneath the waves. You realize that for men who lived aboard these ships, the rocking itself became both torment and lullaby. At times it threatened to toss them into the sea, yet on calmer nights it soothed them into a sleep deeper than any bed ashore could grant. Archaeological reconstructions of Viking longships, when tested on modern waters, reveal how their shallow keels allowed them to skim across waves like skaters on ice. The design meant agility but also constant movement, never still, never fully steady. Sleeping on such a vessel meant surrendering to the sea's sway. You lie flat, feeling the boards press into your back, and soon the rhythm creeps into your bones. It is impossible not to sway with it. One curious story comes from a later Icelandic chronicle. A sailor claimed he could not sleep on land after years at sea because the ground felt dead beneath him. Only when he lay in a rocking hammock could he drift into dreams. Imagine the strangeness of a life so shaped by waves that solid earth itself felt alien. Experts still debate whether this rocking was more aid or hindrance to rest. Some suggest the unsteady deck prevented true deep sleep, while others argue the human body adapts, sinking with the motion until it becomes as natural as breathing. Watching the sailors now, their limbs loose, their snores rising in rhythm with the waves, you lean toward the second view. The sounds around you layer into the lullaby, the creak of oars against their bindings, the low hum of rigging vibrating in the wind, the slap of waves against the hull. Together they form a rhythm oddly comforting. It is no harp or lullaby sung at a hearth, but the sea's music works its spell nonetheless. One odd tidbit whispered in later folklore tells of sailors using the rocking to time their dreams, swearing they could slip into sleep only after the ship tilted thrice to starboard and twice to port. Superstition perhaps, but you can imagine lying awake, counting the sways like a child counts sheep, until drowsiness finally claims you. You roll to your side, mimicking their posture, and notice how their bodies naturally curve with the vessel. A man sprawled beside a chest shifts unconsciously with each rise, never waking, his arms sliding gently across the boards as though he has danced this movement in his sleep 1,000 times. Another man snores loudly, the rhythm of his breath matching the sea's pulse, as though he were an instrument played by the waves themselves. It is striking to think that for these sailors the ocean not only carried them, but also cradled them. The same force that threatened to capsize their world also rocked them into the only rest they could steal, and perhaps, in this paradox, lies the secret of their endurance, fear, and comfort entwined so tightly they became inseparable. Your own eyelids droop, the boards beneath feel harder than stone, yet the sway above them softens the discomfort. You let the motion rock you, forward, back, forward again, until you too feel the peculiar lullaby of the sea. And so the night passes not in silence, but in rhythm, a song without melody, a cradle without walls, rocking the weary men who gave themselves over to the mercy of the waves. The deck is never entirely still. Even when half the crew sleeps under cloaks and hides, someone is always awake, scanning the horizon. You shift your gaze toward the bow and see a figure standing guard, shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes narrowed against the dark sea. The arrangement is simple. Men sleep in shifts while others take the night watch, a pattern that repeats endlessly, keeping the vessel both safe and functional. It is well documented in both saga references and maritime traditions that Viking crews divided their duties into watches. The system ensured that not all men were asleep at once, for danger could arrive without warning. Pirates might strike, storms might rise suddenly, or the ship could drift off course. By rotating responsibility, the crew balanced exhaustion with vigilance, a rhythm that mirrored the rocking sea. One curious note appears in oral tradition. Some men claimed they preferred watch duty to trying to sleep on the cold planks. Standing in the open air with movement and purpose was sometimes less miserable than lying in damp wool, teeth chattering. You imagine the strange comfort of walking the deck, stamping feet for warmth, instead of twisting miserably in a half-sleep. Debates continue among historians over how formalized these watches were. Some argue strict shifts existed, with leaders assigning specific men to guard duty, while others believe it was looser, with whoever remained restless taking up the task. Without clear written records, the truth drifts between these theories. You glance at the weary watchman at the bow and decide formality mattered little. What mattered was that someone kept eyes open while others drifted. The sensation of the night watch is distinct. The sailor leans into the wind, cloaks snapping against his legs, while behind him the ship feels strangely hushed. Snores and sighs ripple softly across the deck, punctuated by the creak of timbers and the slap of waves. The guard's ears strain for anything unusual, the crack of distant oars, the call of seabirds, warning of land, the whisper of wind shifting direction. His task is lonely, but it is also power. For a few hours he holds the safety of all in his gaze. An odd superstition found in later accounts suggests watchmen sometimes carried charms carved with runes for sharp sight, believing these talismans would help them spot danger even in fog or darkness. You imagine one fingering a small bone inscribed with symbols, drawing courage from its presence as the cold gnawed at his resolve. You crouch lower among the sleepers. Their trust is implicit. They have handed their lives to the man awake. You see a sailor curled tight around his cloak, mouth slack, snoring lightly. Another shifts and mutters in dreams, his axe clinking softly against the boards. None of them stir at the sound of the sea. They rely entirely on the one or two men upright at the prow. The rhythm of shifts means rest comes piecemeal. For hours here, perhaps less if storms interfere, then wakefulness and labor once more. It is not the long sleep of land where a body can truly reset, but broken fragments stitched together over endless nights. You wonder how their minds coped, how dreams splintered into shards, how exhaustion blurred the line between waking and sleeping until the two seemed the same. You step closer to the watchman, his eyes glint in the starlight, his breath curling white. He stares not only outward but inward, perhaps counting the hours until relief, perhaps repeating stories in his head to stay alert. He shifts his weight, stamping his feet against the frost, muttering curses at the cold, yet his gaze never leaves the horizon. And then, at last, another rises stiff, groaning, rubbing eyes, heavy with sleep. The shift changes. One man lies down gratefully, pulling his cloak tight, while the other takes his place at the bow. The cycle continues, relentless, necessary, eternal. For the sailors of these winter seas, sleep was never an individual matter but a communal arrangement, a constant balancing of exhaustion and duty. To rest was to trust, to wake was to guard. And so, night after night, they shared not only warmth and cloaks but also vigilance, weaving safety into their fragile slumber. The hush of the watch fades into the low rumble of sleep, and you sense what fills the sailors' minds when they finally surrender to exhaustion, dreams, not the polished visions of poets, but the raw, desperate imaginings of men trapped between frost and sea. As you lean close, you can almost step into their slumber, their eyelids flickering, their lips twitching with murmurs. The images are vivid, painted by hunger, longing, and the relentless rhythm of the waves. It is known from saga poetry that seafarers often spoke of longing for the hearth, the smell of wood smoke, the glow of embers, the sound of laughter in a longhouse. You watch one sailor, his hand curled as though grasping something unseen. Perhaps in his mind he holds a cup of warm ale, or reaches toward a fire blazing in a stone hearth. His breath softens, and the frost at his beard sparkles like embers catching light. One curious belief among later storytellers was that dreams carried omens, especially when dreamt at sea. To see fire was said to foretell a safe return, while to dream of ice-breaking meant danger ahead. You can almost hear the whispered retellings in the morning, sailors exchanging fragments of their visions like tokens, seeking meaning in every flicker of the night mind. Scholars remain divided on whether these dream omens were taken seriously by entire crews or merely entertained as idle talk. Some argue they shaped decisions turning ships back or urging them forward, while others believe they were nothing more than weary chatter. No clear record survives, and so the line between superstition and survival remains blurred. Yet watching the twitch of hands, the murmurs of names half-spoken, you sense the weight dreams held in their hearts. The smells around you shift subtly as the men sleep. Cloaks damp with sweat and salt take on the faint musk of animals once shorn, while the air of the sea remains sharp and briny. This mix of scents, familiar and foul, surely colored their dreams too. Imagine sleeping wrapped in the odor of wool, tar, fish, and unwashed bodies. It is little wonder that visions of home fires and fresh meadows burn so brightly behind their eyelids. One odd detail emerges from a fragment of Icelandic lore. A sailor claimed he dreamt of his wife singing, her voice blending with the creak of the mast, and when he awoke he swore he could still hear her. Was it imagination, or had the groan of wood twisted itself into memory? Perhaps both. For dreams at sea fed on sounds and sensations, bending them into faces and voices far away. You lean closer to a young man, his breath shallow, his fingers twitching as if weaving. Perhaps he dreams of the loom in his mother's hall, or of sisters singing while they spun wool. Next to him, an older sailor snores with a low hum, as if chanting a tune even in sleep. His dream might be of feasts, of sagas sung by firelight, of children clambering on his lap. Each breath carries him further from the cold reality pressing against his skin. The rhythm of the ship seeps into their minds as well. You notice how their bodies shift with the swell, turning the rocking motion into the very pulse of their dreams. One man smiles faintly, as though lulled by the gentle sway, perhaps imagining he lies in a cradle again, rocked by his mother's hand. The sea, harsh by day, becomes a strange parent at night, sometimes cruel, sometimes soothing, always inescapable. Even you begin to drift, caught between their visions and your own. You see flickers of a warm hearth, the glow of firelight on wood, the scent of bread fresh from an oven. Then the creak of the mast intrudes, reshaping the image into smoke curling from a hall roof, distant but reachable. Dreams blur boundaries here between sea and land, between present misery and remembered joy. For the Vikings, these moments of dreaming were perhaps their only true escape. By day they rode, fought, and endured. By night, wrapped in damp cloaks, pressed against wood and steel, they slipped into worlds kinder than the one around them. And even if the visions were brief, fractured, or twisted by hunger, they were treasures carried until dawn. You watch them now, a row of warriors who by daylight look fearsome, but by night become children again, smiling, muttering, clutching invisible comforts. Their dreams of home fires glow brighter than the stars overhead. And you too feel that warmth flicker in your chest as you drift with them into the fragile sanctuary of sleep. You shift your gaze to the middle of the ship, where the shadows gather thickest. The sailors there curl against the hull, cloaks pulled tight, faces half hidden. You expect to see the glow of firelight softening the gloom, but there is none. The deck is dark, save for pale moon and faint starlight, and suddenly you remember on these ships there could be no fire. Archaeological reconstructions and historical consensus tell us that flames aboard wooden vessels coated in tar and resin were a death sentence waiting to happen. A single ember could catch on the rigging, and the entire ship would blaze like a torch in the night. Viking sailors knew this, feared it, and accepted the cost. Nights colder than any land dweller could imagine. You hug your arms tighter, sensing the chill creep deeper without even the comfort of embers to push it back. One curious description appears in medieval commentary about northern seafarers. Outsiders marveled that they could endure without fire, as though they were half-spirits themselves, beings adapted to cold and darkness. The exaggeration rings of awe, but also of truth. You imagine foreign traders peering at Viking crews, shaking their heads at men who slept with nothing but cloaks and hides where others would demand braziers or torches. Debates still echo among modern experts on whether portable braziers were ever attempted aboard. Some experimental archaeologists suggest clay-lined boxes could have provided brief warmth on calm nights, while others dismiss the idea as reckless. No proof has survived, and so the matter rests in speculation. Yet here, watching frost creep across timbers, you see no glow, no spark, only the grim patience of men who accepted fireless nights. You move closer to a cluster of sleepers. Their breaths puff in pale clouds. Their teeth chatter faintly even in dreams. One sailor clutches his cloak tighter, muttering in his sleep, while another has burrowed so deep into his hood that only the tip of his nose peeks out, raw and red. You hear the creak of the mast above, a sound that becomes more ominous without the soft crackle of a hearth to counter it. Silence dominates, heavy, pressing. And yet, in this silence, strange comforts arise. An odd tale from Icelandic folklore describes sailors who claimed the sea itself gave warmth. They said the constant motion of the waves beneath lulled them into believing they lay beside a great slumbering beast, whose body heat seeped upward through the boards. It was surely imagination, but you understand it when shivering. The mind grasps at any story to explain why sleep still arrives. You press your palm against the deck. The wood is damp, cold, unyielding, feels nothing like warmth. And yet, as you lie longer, the numbness dulls the pain, and soon your body begins to believe in its own lies. Perhaps the sailors were right after all. Comfort is sometimes nothing more than stubborn imagination. The absence of fire also meant the absence of its rituals. On land, men would gather by flame, tell stories, pass cups, and end the day with warmth glowing in their chests. Here, there is no circle of light, no shifting shadows cast by flame. The only illumination is the stars, cold and distant, and the pale sheen of frost on wool. Sleep comes without the laughter of comrades by fire, comes alone, silent, resigned. Still they endured. They huddled closer, drew their cloaks tighter, and pressed against one another until the body heat mimicked the hearth. They shared warmth where fire could not exist, building a living flame of flesh and breath. And though the night was harsher for it, survival was achieved. You close your eyes with them, the void pressing in, the cold nipping your ears, no fire, no embers, only the steady rise and fall of chests around you, the human hearth built from stubborn will. And in this bleakness, you begin to understand the strange resilience of those who crossed oceans with nothing but stars for light and their own bodies for warmth. You lean closer to the planks, and the sharp scent of mildew rises into your nose. The boards are damp, always damp, and so are the cloaks spread across them. No matter how carefully the men shook them out, no matter how high they hung them in weak sunlight during the day, the sea's breath always returned. You picture lying down in that wet heaviness, the wool clinging cold to your skin, sticky with brine, never fully drying. Archaeological evidence from preserved Viking sites shows garments waterlogged and stained, fibers stiff with salt. Scholars agree that long voyages meant clothing rarely dried once soaked. The sea simply wouldn't allow it. Cloaks doubled as blankets, and when they absorbed spray, sweat, or rain, they became clammy burdens. You trail your hand across one such cloak. It squishes faintly, as though it has a life of its own. One strange practice hinted at in folklore is that sailors sometimes deliberately soaked their cloaks and then wrung them dry before bedding down, believing the freshly wrung wool insulated better than fabric left half damp. Imagine twisting the cloth until your hands ached, then wrapping yourself in the same dripping material. Odd, but perhaps desperation made sense of it. Researchers disagree on how severe this dampness was in practice. Some argue constant exposure to wind-dried garments faster than we imagine, while others insist that moisture in North Atlantic winters lingered perpetually, sinking into every seam. The truth is likely between, yet standing here among these shivering men, you know the sensation firsthand, a permanent clamminess, cold as an unwelcome hand brushing your spine. You hear the sailors shifting restlessly. One coughs, his throat raw from the damp air. Another scratches at his chest where wool rubs against skin, irritated by salt. The odor is unmistakable must, rot, brine, and sweat tangled together. Even sleep cannot escape it. Their dreams are surely haunted by that smell. An odd tale recorded in later storytelling describes sailors joking that their cloaks grew scales like fish after weeks at sea, the salt crystallizing until the fabric seemed alive. The jest carries truth. You glance down and see crystals sparkling faintly in the moonlight, sharp as glass, glittering where spray dried unevenly. The cloak is not soft bedding but rough armor, both shield and torment. The misery does not stop them from using these garments night after night. What choice do they have? One sailor pulls his damp cloak tighter, ignoring the smell. Another rolls over onto his side, pressing his face into fabric that reeks of the sea, as though by pressing closer he can make peace with it. Their bodies adjust, their tolerance grows. What once felt unbearable becomes routine. The sound of waves slapping the hull is amplified in the damp air, as if the sea itself creeps into every fold of cloth. The deck beneath feels slick, almost slimy, your palm leaving a wet mark where you rest it. And yet the men sleep, not deeply, not comfortably, but enough to restore a shred of strength. You imagine their relief when reaching shore, stripping off those cloaks, spreading them before a real fire until smoke rose from the steaming wool. Perhaps the stench never left entirely, but the memory of warmth must have made the misery worthwhile. For now, though, they have no such luxury. They lie cocooned in dampness, letting exhaustion drown discomfort. You pull the imagined cloak over your shoulders, feel its wet weight sink down, and surrender to the same uneasy rest. The night stretches endlessly, and you realize how different time feels on the open sea. On land, winter nights eventually give way to dawn, and people wake refreshed after long, warm slumbers. Out here, though, sleep comes in snatches, broken by watches, waves, and cold. For the sailors trapped on these voyages, weeks blurred together until each night felt the same, a cycle of exhaustion and survival. Archaeological evidence and historical estimates remind us that Viking expeditions could last months, sometimes half a year, depending on distance and weather. To sail from Scandinavia to Greenland, or across to Vinland, meant enduring not one or two difficult nights but whole seasons of damp planks and shivering bodies. You imagine lying down for the 20th time in the same damp cloak, on the same narrow board, your back aching in the same place. The monotony itself becomes a kind of torment. One curious remark preserved in saga literature hints that sailors sometimes lost track of days entirely, marking time only by the changing of watches and the rationing of food. The voyage was nothing but waking, sleeping, eating, and rowing, one line suggests. You sense the dull sameness yourself, the deck always wet, the air always sharp, the sea always groaning below. Modern historians still debate how sailors managed their mental endurance. Some argue that storytelling and song preserved sanity, while others believe the sheer rhythm of labor, row, eat, sleep, row again, numbed minds into acceptance. There is no clear answer, only the mystery of men who somehow adapted to monotony so crushing it would break most today. You watch a sailor roll onto his side, groaning softly, his hand reaching for the same spot on his chest where he tucks his axe each night. Another shifts to wedge his shoulder against the mast, claiming the same place he has used for weeks. Their habits become rituals, patterns anchoring them against chaos. Even in exhaustion, the repetition becomes comfort. This is my place, this is how I sleep, this is how I wake. An odd anecdote from later folklore tells of a crew that claimed they dreamed the same dream together after so many nights of shared hardship. Each man reported visions of the same hall with fires blazing, the same feast awaiting. Was it coincidence, or proof that endless monotony shaped even the dreamscape into uniformity? You smile at the thought warriors by day, but at night, perhaps dreamers in chorus. The sounds of this endless voyage press in on you. Snores rise and fall in sync with the ship's rocking. A man coughs, phlegm rattling, then settles back to uneasy silence. The deck creaks in a rhythm you now know by heart, as if the ship itself sings the same refrain over and over. You realize how quickly familiarity breeds a strange sort of peace. Even misery becomes predictable, and in that predictability lies endurance. Your own body begins to mirror theirs. You curl your knees, tuck your arms, adjust your cloak exactly as you have before. The repetition calms you, even as it bores you. Perhaps this is the secret of surviving endless winter voyages. You stop asking for comfort and settle instead for sameness. Weeks stretch forward. The ship will not change. The sea will not relent, and the planks will never grow softer. But each night, sailors surrender a few more hours to sleep, proving that human will adapt even to the bleakest conditions. And you, lying among them, begin to sense how they endured not just nights, but entire seasons afloat, half asleep, half awake, always pressing forward into the unknown. The monotony of the voyage weighs heavy, but just before sleep the men sometimes create a ripple of change. You hear it begin as a low murmur, almost drowned by the creak of the ship. Then another voice joins and another, until the deck hums softly. Songs before sleep, this is their comfort, their ritual, not the roaring chants of battle, but hushed sagas, fragments of verse, and lullabies disguised as epic tales. It is well known from saga literature that Norse culture was steeped in oral tradition. Every hall rang with poetry. Every family kept memories alive through spoken verse. On a ship, far from hearths and audiences, the practice continued. Men muttered lines of Eddic poems, recalling gods and heroes, or sang work songs slower, softer, stretching them into drowsy melodies. You hear the cadence now, uneven but sincere, weaving through the darkness. One curious note from folklore says that some crews believed singing before sleep warded off evil spirits lurking on the waves. A verse about Thor's hammer might double as both entertainment and protection. You imagine a man pulling his cloak tighter as he whispers of Mjolnir shattering giants, convincing himself the hammer's echo will strike down frost and fear alike. Specialists are not unanimous about how widespread this practice was. Some point to surviving verse as evidence that nearly every voyage included song, while others caution that silence may have been more common, with only certain crews indulging in ritualized singing. The absence of conclusive records leaves the question open, but as you listen to the hushed chorus vibrating across the deck, the plausibility feels certain. The sound soothes even the restless. A sailor shivering beside the mast closes his eyes more easily as the voices wash over him. Another shifts, muttering the last line of a saga as though it were a prayer, before finally settling into sleep. The songs do not banish the cold, but they wrap the mind in familiarity. For a moment, the ship feels less like a coffin adrift in black waters, and more like a hall under stars. One odd anecdote preserved in later retellings describes a crew that sang bawdy verses before bed, laughing despite frostbite, their humor so loud it was said to offend the sea itself. A storm rose soon after, and they swore never again to mock the waves with laughter. You picture the awkward quiet the following night, men whispering only solemn sagas lest the sea listen too closely. The sensory details around you shift with the singing. The groan of timbers takes on a rhythm, syncing with the voices. The splash of water against the hull becomes percussion. Even the whistle of the wind through the rigging seems to harmonize. For a fleeting moment, the entire vessel becomes an instrument, carrying the lullaby into the cold night. You notice how the voices fade one by one. A line is left unfinished as a man drifts away. Another hums softly until snores replace the melody. What remains is a fragile echo, a song dissolving into dreams. The silence afterward feels different, less bleak, more sacred, as if the night has been blessed by verse. Your own chest loosens. You imagine singing a line yourself, perhaps clumsy and off-key, but enough to join the current. The act is less about sound than about surrender. By voicing the old words, you remind yourself that you are part of something larger, a chain that stretches from farmstead to sea, from ancestors to the present. The song fades. The men are asleep, their mouths slack, their cloaks pulled close. The ship creaks, the sea murmurs, but the memory of words lingers in the air, and you, lying among them, feel the comfort of ritual proof that even in the harshest nights, humanity carves space for beauty before surrendering to sleep. The songs fade into silence, and the night grows colder still. You pull your cloak tighter, though the wool scratches at your neck, and you feel your toes numb despite the layers. For the Viking sailors around you, this numbness was no minor discomfort but a looming threat, frostbite, the kind of danger that crept slowly, quietly, and then claimed fingers and toes before dawn ever arrived. It is confirmed through both climate studies and skeletal remains that voyages into the North Atlantic exposed crews to freezing conditions capable of permanent injury. Even in summer, the northern seas bit with cold. In winter, the risk of frostbite was constant. You glance at a sailor's bare hand where his cloak has slipped, his fingers pale, the nails darkening slightly at the edges. He stirs, pulls the hand back inside the folds, and presses it against his chest. One rather curious measure mentioned in scattered folklore was that some sailors smeared animal fat onto their extremities before sleep, believing it sealed in warmth. Imagine rubbing your toes with tallow, the smell pungent, the grease clinging, then wrapping them in damp wool and praying the combination held the frost at bay. It sounds unpleasant, but perhaps it spared some from waking to deadened skin. Experts continue to debate how effective these makeshift protections were. Some argue the fat would have offered real insulation against cold winds, while others suggest it would have attracted vermin or simply rubbed away on wet boards. Without conclusive proof, the practice remains speculative but vivid in its possibility. You peer at the faces of the men. Their breaths rise in pale clouds. Their eyelids twitch as they drift between waking and dreams. One stirs with a groan, curling tighter, as though his body remembers that stillness is dangerous. Movement, even in sleep, keeps blood alive. You understand the instinct. Stretch your toes, flex your fingers, shift your weight. Do anything to keep the cold from claiming them. An odd tidbit preserved in a saga fragment tells of a man who woke screaming because he dreamed his feet were burning, only to discover frostbite had numbed them completely. His companions rubbed his legs furiously, trying to restore sensation. The dream and reality blurred, pain and cold mingling until the body betrayed itself. You shiver at the thought, grateful that your own toes still throb with life. The ship itself offers little mercy. Frost forms on the edges of the planks, sparkling faintly under moonlight. Your fingers trace the crystals sharp as tiny blades. The sailors lie against this frozen surface, their cloaks insufficient shields, and you wonder how many woke with frost patterns pressed into their skin. The cold leaves its mark even in sleep, yet despite the threat they endured. You watch as one sailor shifts closer to another, their cloaks overlapping, feet pressed together. Shared warmth becomes strategy again, not just for comfort, but for survival. The heat of one man's legs can mean the difference between numb toes and lost ones. You close your eyes and imagine yourself among them. Your fingers tingle painfully. Your breath burns. Your body fights the creeping numbness. You know that if you surrender fully, if you let yourself drift too far into sleep, you may not wake. And yet exhaustion is stronger. You feel your muscles loosen despite the danger, lulled by the sea's rhythm. This is the cruel paradox of frostbite at sea. To rest is to risk freezing, but to stay awake is to exhaust the body to collapse. And so the sailors gambled each night, lying between warmth and death, trusting in wool, in hides, in one another, and perhaps in the gods themselves to carry them through. The night grows heavier, and you notice something peculiar among the sleeping men. Not all of them drift off with only cloaks and hides. A few clutch small objects in their hands, or wear trinkets tied with leather cords around their necks. Tiny charms, crude amulets, bones carved with runes. You realize these are not decorations. They are talismans, companions in the dark, meant to keep fear at bay while sleep hovers near. Archaeological finds in Viking graves often include small pendants, Thor's hammer cast in bronze, animal teeth strung on leather, polished stones marked with runic scratches. On land, these spoke of faith and identity, but aboard a ship they became shields of another kind. The sea was vast, merciless, and unknown. To close your eyes without some charm at your side felt like walking unarmed into battle. You lean closer and see a sailor's fingers curled tight around a smooth bone, its surface etched faintly. He sleeps more soundly than the others, as if the object anchors him. One curious belief recorded in later folklore is that sailors thought charms could keep nightmares from crawling aboard with the frost. A Thor's hammer might shatter bad dreams. A fox bone might grant cunning to escape spirits lurking in the mist. You imagine the comfort of gripping such a token, the edge pressing into your palm, a reminder that even in sleep the gods, or perhaps luck itself, stand guard. Not all scholars agree on how seriously these charms were taken. Some argue they were symbolic gestures, no more potent than a child's comfort blanket, while others believe they carried genuine religious weight intertwined with ritual. The truth likely falls between, but as you watch men shift and sigh, their hands never straying from their amulets, you sense the belief was real enough. The air hums with the strangeness of these objects. One sailor mutters in his sleep words half prayer, half song. Another scratches his chest where a pendant rests, as though ensuring it hasn't slipped away. You feel the presence of something beyond the ship, not divine perhaps, but born of human need to make meaning in a world of uncertainty. An odd tale retold in Iceland centuries later speaks of a sailor who carried a raven's claw around his neck. His companions mocked him, saying he smelled of carrion, but he insisted the claw kept him alive by warning of storms in his dreams. When he survived a shipwreck that drowned others, the story spread, and for years afterward men tied bird bones to their belts before sleeping at sea. Whether true or not, the tale lingers like the claw itself, sharp and unsettling. The atmosphere of the deck shifts as you focus on these small tokens. It is not only the cold and rocking that shape the sailor's sleep, but the intangible weight of belief. Each charm whispers reassurance. You are not alone, you are guarded, your nightmares cannot win. In such conviction, men let go of fear long enough to close their eyes. You imagine lying with them, clutching a pendant of your own, perhaps a smooth stone from the shore still holding the memory of land. You roll it between your fingers as you drift, and the sea feels less hostile. Symbols are powerful not because of what they are, but because of what men believe them to be. Around you the men settle deeper. Their charms rest against skin, bones, and boards. The ship creaks, the sea sighs, but their breathing steadies. Faith, whether in gods, in trinkets, or in simple superstition, has built them a fragile fortress against the night, and in that fortress uneasy dreams can finally come. The deck feels quieter now, though the creak of timbers never fades. You shift slightly and hear something else, a faint scurrying beneath the planks. At first you think it might be the groan of the hull, but then the sound repeats, a quick patter, tiny claws scraping wood. Rats. You peer toward the shadows, and sure enough, the small shapes dart along the edges of the deck, vanishing through cracks, bold enough to share the ship with men. Archaeological digs of old harbors and ship burials have uncovered rodent remains, confirming what common sense already suggests. Where grain, fish, and hides were stored, vermin followed. Viking ships were no exception. You imagine barrels of dried fish stacked in the hold, sacks of grain lashed tight, the smell attracting creatures that needed no invitation. These sailors endured more than cold. They endured the constant company of stowaways with teeth. One rather odd detail, preserved in a Norse anecdote, tells of men claiming that rats were omens of fortune. If they scurried toward the prow, good weather lay ahead. If they retreated aft, storms would follow. Superstition gave meaning to the annoyance, turning pests into unwilling messengers. You picture sailors craning their necks, following the scurrying shapes as though they were prophets in fur. Scholars still debate how great a nuisance rats posed on long voyages. Some believe their numbers were limited, surviving only on scraps, while others argue infestations could be significant, gnawing at provisions and chewing through ropes. The lack of concrete evidence leaves the question open, but the sounds around you make the annoyance undeniable. The scratching is constant, a background chorus against the sea's rhythm. You watch as one sailor shifts in his sleep, slapping blindly at his cloak where a rat's whiskers brushed his hand. He groans, rolls over, and pulls the wool tighter, muttering curses even in slumber. Another man kicks out suddenly, startling a scurrying shape into squeaks before it disappears beneath the boards. Their rest is not only broken by cold and waves, but by tiny invaders sharing the same fragile space. An odd tale from later folklore imagines sailors training shipboard cats to hunt rats during voyages, though the practicality is questionable. You smile at the image, a fierce warrior stroking a half-starved cat at his side, both relying on each other for company during the night. Whether real or merely a dream of later storytellers, the idea softens the grim picture for a moment. The smell confirms the truth. Amid salt, tar, and wool there is a faint sour odor, the unmistakable stench of rodent nests. You wrinkle your nose, but the sailors sleep on, too exhausted to care. Over time, the irritation becomes part of the landscape, another hardship folded into the rhythm of survival. The rats, for all their menace, also serve a strange function. They remind you that life clings stubbornly, even in the harshest places. As sailors shiver and mutter in dreams, these tiny creatures thrive, adapting to darkness and damp as deftly as the men themselves. Perhaps the sailors even envied them, for rats never seem troubled by frostbite or damp cloaks. You shift back, lying again among the sleeping forms. The scratching continues, but now it seems part of the symphony. The waves, the creaks, the snores, and the soft scurry of rats all blending together. The sailors twitch and stir, but never rise fully. Even in nuisance, exhaustion triumphs. Sleep, however restless, wins in the end. The rats retreat, and the deck falls back into uneasy quiet. Overhead, the clouds thin, and a pale wash of silver spills across the water. Moonlight. You tilt your head, and see how the sailors notice it too. Even in their half-sleep, their eyes open briefly, drawn to the horizon where the sea glimmers like polished steel. Some men linger in that moment, staring as though the moon is a lantern hung just for them. It is well established from saga poetry that moon and stars guided Viking voyages. Without them, the sailors were blind on winter seas. The moon in particular was more than light. It was orientation, reassurance, and sometimes even companion. You picture a weary man lifting his head from a damp cloak, squinting toward the horizon, and sighing softly as the glow reminds him the world is wider than darkness. One curious fragment in Icelandic folklore tells of sailors claiming the moon was a shield held aloft by Thor, its bright face protecting them from spirits of the deep. To sleep beneath such a sky was to rest under divine watch. You imagine their comfort, to see silver light glimmer on black water, and believe it meant safety, however temporary. Scholars remain divided on whether such myths shaped actual navigation, or were simply poetic flourishes. Some argue sailors relied purely on practical astronomy, while others believe faith and science were inseparable, each reinforcing the other. The lack of distinction hardly matters as you watch. The moon glows, the sea glistens, and tired men draw hope from the sight. A sailor near you turns on his back, eyes open just enough to gaze upward. His breath fogs slowly, and his lips form a faint smile. The light smooths the lines of exhaustion on his face. Another stirs, pulling his cloak tighter, but leaves one hand exposed, fingers twitching as if reaching toward the pale sphere. They may not speak of it aloud, but the moon becomes part of their dreams, etched into the night like a second half. One rather odd tidbit preserved in oral tradition claims some crews timed their sleep by the phases of the moon, believing new moons brought restless nights while full moons offered peace. Perhaps it was superstition, or perhaps the extra light truly eased their minds. You notice tonight's glow making shadows softer, crevices less menacing, and wonder if you too would sleep easier beneath such silver. The atmosphere shifts with the moon's rise. The deck seems calmer, the sea gentler, though you know both remain as dangerous as before. The light fools the senses into peace, and the sailors gladly accept the lie. For men exhausted beyond reason, a glimmer of beauty is enough to cradle them. The sounds of the ship soften. The groan of wood blends into the whisper of wind, and snores harmonize with the rhythm of waves. The silver light paints everything: planks, faces, even weapons, with a sheen that makes them look less brutal. For a fleeting hour the ship seems sacred, drifting through a dream carved in silver. You let yourself sink into it too. The moon hovers above, patient, unchanging, and you feel your own body relax in its glow. The cold still bites, the planks remain hard, but the sight above soothes you. Perhaps this is why the men open their eyes to it before drifting off, to remind themselves that even on black seas beauty persists. And so they sleep again, guarded not by fire or walls, but by the steady watch of the moon. Its silver face glimmers on the waves, and for this night at least the harshness of the voyage softens into something almost gentle. The moon fades behind drifting clouds, and the deck sinks back into shadow. As silence thickens again, you cannot help wondering, how exactly did these sailors arrange themselves for rest? Did they lie wherever exhaustion struck? Or was there an order places claimed, routines followed? The question lingers, not only for you, but for generations of researchers trying to reconstruct how men truly slept aboard these lean, merciless ships. Archaeological digs of Viking vessels reveal no fixed bunks. The long ships, designed for speed and shallow waters, left no room for private chambers. Unlike medieval cogs or later caravels, these ships were stripped bare, a floating skeleton of planks and beams, yet fragments of mats, traces of woven reeds, and descriptions from sagas hint at improvisation. Did men spread mats on deck, or did they sleep directly on their sea chests? The evidence is suggestive but not decisive. Some modern scholars argue mats of straw or rushes must have been carried, providing a thin cushion between sailor and plank. The logic is simple. Even the toughest crew would struggle with weeks of bare wood under their backs. Yet others cautioned that space was precious, and mats soaked quickly in salt spray, turning from bedding into sodden burdens. Debate endures, as fierce as the waves themselves. One curious detail appears in later folklore. Sailors claim to have slung ropes or spare canvas between the ship's ribs, forming hammocks of a kind. If true, it would be an extraordinary innovation, centuries before hammocks became common in Europe. Some experimental archaeologists have even tested this theory. Stringing cloth across replica longships, the results are awkward but functional sleep made easier, though balance precarious. Still, no physical evidence has survived, leaving the idea hovering in tantalizing uncertainty. The sailors you watch now seem indifferent to scholarly arguments. One sprawls atop a chest, head tilted back awkwardly, cloak draped across him like a collapsed tent. Another wedges himself against the curve of the hull, body bent to match its angle, as if shaped by the ship itself. Their choices are pragmatic, guided not by theory, but by fatigue. Wherever exhaustion caught them, that became a bed. An odd tale from Iceland speaks of a crew who fought over the flattest planks, drawing lots each night for the best spots. You smile at the pettiness of warriors, men who faced storms and bloodshed by day, quarreling like children over boards at night. Yet the story rings true. Discomfort magnifies small mercies, until even a smoother plank feels like treasure. You shift closer, pressing your palm against the hull. The wood is cold, curved, unyielding. Imagine lying with your back against it for hours, the ache creeping into your bones. No wonder sailors improvised stuffing cloaks beneath them, stacking shields, even using spare ropes as padding. Each man found his own compromise between space, weight, and rest. What strikes you most is the absence of privacy. There are no corners hidden from view, no chambers or curtains. Every man sleeps in sight of the others, his snores, twitches, and mutterings shared with the whole crew. Intimacy becomes unavoidable, the line between self and group dissolving. To live and sleep aboard these ships meant surrendering individuality to the rhythm of the collective. The sea rocks the vessel again, and you notice how the men shift with it, bodies sliding slightly across planks, shoulders bumping. Some stir but do not wake, accustomed to the sway. Their chosen beds are less about comfort than about stability wedged against mast or chest. They reduce the chance of being rolled like cargo with each wave. And so the question of where Vikings slept remains a puzzle. Were mats common, or only for wealthier crews? Did makeshift hammocks ever truly exist, or are they inventions of later imagination? Historians still argue, but the sailors themselves cared little. They collapsed wherever fatigue allowed, transforming every inch of deck into a reluctant bed. You lie among them now, feeling the plank's hardness beneath, the curve of the hull against your shoulder. It is no mattress, no chamber, but it is a place, and for the weary, a place is enough. The dark stretches on, but then a subtle shift comes over the ship. The wind softens, the sea hushes. You sense the moment just before dawn, when the world seems to hold its breath. Even the sailors stir differently now. Their sleep lightens, their limbs twitch, their faces crease as though they already feel the change in air. It is the hush before dawn, a fragile calm, unlike any other time at sea. It is well established from Norse sagas and poetry that dawn carried symbolic weight. The breaking of light was tied to renewal, to God's returning, to the world's rebirth each day. On land, it meant hearth fires rekindled. On the sea, it meant hope for warmer air, or simply the relief of having survived another night. You watch the men roll onto their backs, their eyes still closed, but their breathing quickens, as though their bodies know the sun approaches. One curious story retold in Icelandic tradition claims sailors swore that dawn itself sang a faint hum heard across the water as the first light crept in. Perhaps it was imagination, perhaps the groan of ice shifting, but they believed it enough to whisper of it each morning. You listen closely, and in the stillness you almost hear it too, a soft tone, barely audible, riding on the hush. Specialists disagree on how much real rest sailors gained before dawn. Some argue the pre-dawn hours were shallow sleep, with men half alert for the signal to rise. Others suggest exhaustion pushed them into deeper slumber right before morning broke. No firm conclusion exists, but the pattern you see before you seems clear. Men teetering between sleep and waking, bodies reluctant to rise, yet minds already turning outward. The ship feels different in this hour. The noises soften. Even the rats grow still, as if respecting the threshold between night and day. The creak of the mast lowers into a groan, and the splash of waves becomes gentle, rhythmic, less menacing. The air itself shifts, crisp yet faintly warmer, carrying a promise not yet fulfilled. A sailor near you opens his eyes briefly, stares upward at the dim stars, then closes them again. Another mutters under his breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps only a reflex. Their faces are pale, lined with frost, but they seem calmer than in the restless depths of night. The hush offers a reprieve, a momentary illusion of peace. An odd anecdote from later folklore tells of crews who swore dawn was when spirits slipped away, no longer haunting the ship. If true, it gave the hour more meaning still, not just the arrival of light, but the departure of dread. You smile at the thought of sailors rolling over with relief, convinced ghosts had abandoned them to the Sunday. The first streaks of pale light creep across the horizon. They are faint, but enough to silver the edges of the sea. You notice how sailors shift more now, stretching stiff arms, flexing numb toes, grumbling under their breath. None rise fully yet, but the spell of night has broken. Dreams scatter like mist, replaced by the dull ache of morning chores. You draw your cloak closer, savoring the last traces of calm. The hush before dawn is fleeting, but in it lies a rare gentleness aboard this brutal vessel. The men may never admit it aloud, but perhaps they treasure this hour most. The stillness, the faint promise, the fragile pause before labor begins again. For now you lie with them, half asleep, half awake, breathing the crisp air. The horizon brightens slowly, and with it the reality of another day returns. Yet for a heartbeat longer, the hush lingers, a reminder that even on the coldest seas, silence and peace still exist. The pale horizon brightens, but when you stretch your hand across the deck, you feel the chill clinging stubbornly. Cloaks, hides, even skin are damp, heavy with dew and spray. You glance at a sailor tugging his garment tighter, only to realize it is not a cloak at all, but a soaked tunic he has pulled over his chest like a blanket. In desperation, even clothing meant for day becomes bedding at night. Archaeological finds of Viking garments show thick wool tunics, trousers, and cloaks, woven tight to withstand wear. Yet when storms drenched everything, sailors often had nothing dry left. It is widely acknowledged that they sometimes slept in sodden garments, spreading spares over themselves as makeshift coverings. You imagine the clammy weight pressing down, the wool sticky and salty, and wonder how they found any comfort under such punishment. One curious tale preserved in Icelandic lore claims men joked their tunics became second skins of the sea, stiff with salt until they cracked like ice. They laughed grimly, but still wore them to bed, convinced that salt itself held some power against the cold. Whether humor or superstition, it shows how necessity turned misery into ritual. Researchers remain divided on whether sailors rotated clothing to manage dampness, or simply endured in whatever state they found themselves. Some argue spare garments were carefully rationed, while others suggest spares were scarce, and most men had only what they wore. The lack of consensus mirrors the scene before you. Sailors huddled under sodden tunics, grumbling in sleep, unable to choose otherwise. You kneel beside a man curled tightly under his damp clothes. His face glistens with condensation. His hair clings to his forehead. Each breath rises faintly, but his shoulders tremble even in dreams. Beside him, another stirs irritably, scratching at his chest where the wool rubs against skin, raw from friction and salt. The discomfort is constant, yet exhaustion drags them under anyway. An odd detail from later folklore describes crews spreading garments across the deck by day, letting the wind whip them dry, only to find gulls stealing scraps for nests. You picture warriors cursing as birds carried away bits of their only bedding. The story may be embellished, but the frustration feels real enough. The smell is undeniable. Wet wool mingled with brine, sour with sweat, permeates the air, thick and oppressive, clinging to your nose even as you shift away. For the sailors, there is no shifting. They lie wrapped in that stench, asleep in garments that reek of sea and labor. It is unpleasant, but it is also survival. You press a hand against one damp tunic, feeling the weight and texture. It clings like a soaked rag, yet beneath it, the sailor's chest rises steadily. His body accepts what the mind resents. That warmth, however meager, hides even in wet cloth. To abandon it would be colder still. The deck sways, and droplets fall from the rigging, sprinkling the sleepers below. They groan, roll over, tug garments tighter. The ship itself conspires to keep them damp, yet they endure. They mutter in dreams, perhaps remembering warm beds ashore, yet their hands never release the sodden coverings. It is not comfortable, but it is profound, a reminder that even the sea sometimes rests. And in that pause, fragile as it is, the sailors take what they can. A few more minutes of uneasy sleep before the world stirs again. The eerie stillness does not last. A low rumble builds at the edge of hearing, first mistaken for a dream. Then the deck jolts beneath you, and the wind lashes suddenly, tearing through rigging with a shriek. The storm has returned, and with it the end of sleep. You feel the men around you stir, not to rise fully, but to clutch at the deck, at chests, at each other. Their chance of rest dissolves in the fury of waves. From both saga descriptions and modern reconstructions, we know storms on the North Atlantic could break with terrifying speed. The shallow, agile Viking ships rode waves like leaves, but that meant every man aboard felt the violence directly. To try to sleep in such conditions was nearly impossible. Survival required clinging rather than dreaming. You grasp at the boards yourself, fingers numb as spray whips across your face. One curious passage in a later saga mentions that some sailors claimed they could sleep through storms if they wedged themselves tightly between cargo and hull. Perhaps a few hardy souls managed, lulled into unconsciousness by sheer exhaustion. Yet most lay awake, eyes clenched shut, bodies battered as though the sea itself sought to shake them loose. Historians remain uncertain how crews balanced vigilance and rest in such chaos. Some argue that half the men stayed awake to manage sails, while others attempted brief slumber, while others believe storms simply suspended all hope of rest until calmer waters returned. The absence of clear answers mirrors what you see now. Men not sleeping but enduring, their bodies horizontal yet their minds unwillingly alert. The ship bucks violently, and you hear a cry as one sailor slides across the deck, only saved when another seizes his arm. Both collapse against the mast, breath ragged, then huddle together, unwilling to move. Sleep is out of reach, but still they close their eyes, letting exhaustion drag them into uneasy half-awareness despite the danger. An odd anecdote from later folklore describes a man who swore he dreamed most vividly during storms. He claimed the roar of wind and water became the voices of gods, speaking in riddles that only he could hear. His companions dismissed it as madness, yet you can imagine it, noise so overwhelming it becomes indistinguishable from imagination. Perhaps, in a way, storms force dreams upon even the unwilling. The sensations engulf you. The boards slam like drums beneath your body. Salt spray stings your eyes. The wind tears at cloaks, whipping them against skin until they feel like whips. Each wave strikes with the weight of stone, and the ship groans as though it might split apart. The men cling to timbers, muttering prayers, curses, or nothing at all. Despite the terror, some surrender to exhaustion anyway. You notice one sailor slumped against a chest, head lolling, mouth open in slack defiance of the storm. His hands clutch the wood even in sleep, muscles taut. Another lies flat, cloak plastered to his body by spray, yet his eyes are closed, his breath steady. The body will rest when it must, even if the sea rages. For most, however, sleep is shattered. They lie awake in darkness, bodies shaking, ears filled with the roar. They are captives of the storm, unable to fight, unable to rest, caught in limbo until the fury passes. You lie back, pulling your own imagined tunic across your chest. The wet weight is unpleasant, but you force yourself to surrender to it as they do. The truth becomes clear. At sea, comfort is not the absence of hardship, but the decision to endure it. Even soaked, even foul-smelling, the garments serve their purpose. And so the sailors sleep on, cocooned in dampness, surviving another night. The first streaks of dawn are faint, but sleep is still heavy on the deck. You shift your gaze toward a sailor who stirs restlessly, scratching at his scalp. His nails rake through thick hair, and soon another man follows suit, rubbing at his neck with groggy irritation. You realize it isn't only cold or dampness tormenting them. It is the ceaseless crawl of lice and fleas. Night aboard is not merely about frost and fatigue. It is about itching, scratching, and the constant battle against tiny intruders. Archaeological evidence from Viking burials often reveals knit combs, carved delicately from bone or antler. These weren't vanity items, they were survival tools. Combing through hair and beard was one of the few defenses sailors had against the vermin that thrived in close quarters. You picture a man pulling such a comb from his pouch before sleep, dragging it through his hair by firelight on land. But at sea, forced to scratch in the dark, muttering curses at invisible pests. One curious detail in Norse folklore suggests that some sailors swore by smearing ashes or sand into their hair and clothes before bedding down, hoping the grit would discourage lice. Imagine lying under a cloak with grains of sand grinding into your skin, the cure hardly better than the curse. Still, men desperate for relief tried whatever strange remedies they could muster. Experts remain divided on how severe these infestations became during long voyages. Some argue they were constant companions, while others believe cold weather limited their spread. The evidence is inconclusive, though your own observations of sailors scratching in their sleep, shifting irritably, and tugging at collars leave little doubt of their presence. A sailor near you groans, rolling onto his side, knuckles raking across his arm where fleas have bitten. Another stirs, pulling his tunic tighter as though hiding from the pests. You can almost feel the irritation yourself, the way the itch grows sharper when you try to ignore it, forcing you awake even when exhaustion begs you to stay still. An odd anecdote from later Icelandic tales tells of sailors laughing at one man who slept so soundly, he became a feast for vermin, waking covered in bites. They nicknamed him the Banquet, and though the story was told with humor, it reveals the misery hidden behind such laughter. Better to joke than to despair. The air carries a faint sour odor, a mixture of sweat and infestation. It clings to cloaks, to hides, to every seam of wool. You imagine waking with welts along your arms, scratching until skin breaks, only to crawl back under a cloak still alive with movement. And yet there is no escape. Lice and fleas thrive where bodies press close, where garments stay damp, where warmth itself becomes a trap. The sailors endure by shrugging it off. You see them scratching lazily, even in dreams, as if their bodies have accepted the constant irritation. One man claws at his scalp, sighs, and slips back into snoring, the itch forgotten for a moment. Another twitches his leg violently, then grows still again, as though the pests are simply another rhythm of life, no different than waves or creaks. You lie among them, and soon you feel phantom itches creeping along your own skin. You scratch, though there is nothing there, and suddenly understand how deep the misery burrows not only into flesh, but into the mind. Sleep becomes fragile, restless, broken by scratching and shifting. Yet still, exhaustion wins, and the men drift back into uneasy dreams, welts and all. In the end, this too becomes part of the sailor's world. Cold, damp, hunger, and pests all woven into the fabric of survival. They sleep despite it because they must, and you, scratching along with them, accept the same truth. Discomfort is constant, but slumber still arrives. The scratching fades, and for a while only snores and creaks remain. Then the ship shifts again, and a new sensation rises. Not noise, not motion, but absence. The sea grows strangely calm. The wind pauses. Even the rats beneath the planks seem to retreat into stillness. It is one of those rare moments of eerie silence when the world itself seems to hold its breath. From the sagas we know that sailors often feared silence at sea more than storms. Noise meant life, waves slapping, wind roaring, ropes singing. Silence, by contrast, carried a weight that felt unnatural, as though the gods themselves had withdrawn. You feel it now, the emptiness pressing in, the sound of your own breath loud in your ears. One curious line in a fragmentary tale speaks of sailors whispering that silence meant the sea spirits were listening. If true, they hushed themselves even more, unwilling to disturb whatever unseen presence hovered nearby. You picture men frozen mid-sentence, their words drying on their lips, before pulling cloaks over their heads and pretending to sleep. Academics remain divided on whether these silences were common meteorological lulls or exaggerations woven into story. Some argue that in the northern seas brief calms did occur, while others claim the saga's heightened drama by painting such pauses as ominous. The debate remains unresolved, but the sensation you feel aboard is real, an unease that slithers through the bones when the ocean quiets too much. The sailors stir uneasily in their slumber. One man mutters, shifting as though the silence itself has entered his dreams. Another clutches his axe tighter. Even in sleep, the lack of sound sharpening instinct more than noise ever could. Their breathing grows heavier, as though their bodies resist the calm. An odd anecdote survives in oral tradition of a sailor who supposedly awoke in such silence, and swore he heard voices whispering beneath the hull. His companions dismissed it, but the tale spread nonetheless. The sea was never truly quiet, only full of sounds too faint for most ears. You imagine him sitting up, eyes wide, while everyone else rolled over, choosing to ignore what they feared they might hear too. The silence reshapes every sensation. You hear the crackle of frost breaking under your palm as you shift. You hear the faint rustle of wool as men move. You even hear the rhythm of your own heartbeat, loud in the still air. Each sound, amplified by quiet, feels intrusive, as if the ship itself listens. The moonlight sharpens edges in this stillness. Faces appear more gaunt, weapons gleam more sharply, shadows stretch unnaturally long across the deck. It is beautiful but unnerving. You can see why men huddled closer in these moments, clinging to warmth not only for survival but for reassurance. Gradually, exhaustion pushes unease aside. The sailors close their eyes again, forcing themselves back into rest despite the quiet pressing against them. One snores louder than usual, almost defiantly, as if daring the silence to challenge him. Another mutters, a prayer under his breath, words muffled but steady. In their stubbornness lies resilience. You lie back as well, listening to the absence. Their exhaustion deepens, their nerves fray, but still they endure, because what else can they do? The storm rages on, tearing the night apart, but beneath it the truth becomes clear. Viking sleep was fragile, stolen, never guaranteed. Sometimes the sea permitted it, lulling men with rhythm. Other times it denied it utterly, replacing dreams with terror. Tonight is the latter, and you, clinging beside them, share their insomnia, waiting for dawn to bring not comfort but simply survival. The storm drifts away by dawn, leaving the ship soaked and trembling, its crew even more so. Sleep has been stolen from them, but exhaustion refuses to release its grip. You see men sag where they sit, heads nodding forward, eyelids heavy. When they finally collapse again, dreams arrive quickly, strange, fleeting comforts amid misery. These rare good dreams become treasures, brief escapes from a world of cold wood and endless waves. Archaeological and literary evidence alike suggest that dreams held real meaning for Viking Age people. Sagas are filled with visions interpreted as omens, warnings, or promises. But not every dream was about destiny. Some were simply the desperate mind's gift of warmth and food, when neither could be found. You watch a sailor smile faintly as he sleeps, his face softening in a way you've not seen while he's awake. Perhaps in his dream he feels a hearth's glow or eats fresh bread rather than salted fish. One curious account from a saga tells of a warrior who admitted he longed for battle in his dreams. Not because of glory, but because in dream fights he felt warm, his blood racing. Imagine finding relief even in visions of violence simply because it thawed your frozen limbs for a while. You wonder what other strange comforts appeared in the minds of men half-starved, half-frozen, desperate for release. Experts differ in their interpretations of these dream escapes. Some argue they were mere byproducts of fatigue and hunger, while others insist they were deeply tied to culture, reinforcing ideals of hearth, kinship, and courage. The lack of consensus hardly matters when you watch the men before you. Their bodies twitch, their lips murmur, their faces glow for moments, all proof that dreams offered them a sanctuary the sea could not. A sailor beside you groans softly, then sighs in relief as though something pleasant unfolded behind his eyelids. Another stirs, mutters a woman's name, then drifts deeper into sleep. Their breathing evens, their limbs loosen, and for the first time in nights their rest looks almost peaceful. The ship still rocks, the planks still drip with moisture, but in their dreams the world has shifted. One rather odd piece of folklore claims sailors sometimes shared dreams, describing similar visions after waking. Perhaps it was coincidence, perhaps the effect of shared environment, the same noises, the same smells, shaping imagination in parallel. You picture men laughing softly at dawn, realizing they all dreamed of bread baking or children's laughter, and for a moment feeling less alone. The sensations of their sleep are palpable even to you. You feel warmth where there is none, the illusion of soft earth beneath you instead of wet planks, the faint taste of something sweet on your tongue. It is fragile and fleeting, but in that moment it feels more real than the cold gnawing at your toes. Dreams do not change the sea, but they change the sleeper, however briefly. Of course, not every vision is kind. You notice a sailor jerk suddenly, his face contorted in fear. He mutters incoherently, perhaps reliving a raid gone wrong, or seeing the sea rise to swallow him whole. Nightmares, too, are part of the bargain. Yet even then, when he wakes shivering, gasping, he has at least rested a little, if only in fragments. The paradox strikes you. In a place where rest is scarce, even bad dreams are preferable to none. At least they prove the body slipped into true sleep for a moment. At least they show the mind was able to escape reality, however twisted the vision. You close your eyes with them now, and for a fleeting instant you too feel warmth on your face. Smell bread baking, hear laughter. The sea cannot offer such things, but the mind can. And that is how Viking sailors endured, by treasuring the fleeting comfort of dreams as though they were gold. The brief comfort of dreams lingers as dawn stretches wider, but not all sailors rest peacefully. You sense unease in the way some men stir, eyes darting beneath lids, mouths murmuring words that sound more like warnings than prayers. When they wake they whisper to each other, not about bread or hearth fires, but about something stranger, ghosts, spirits wandering across the waves, tales of visitors who came in the night when the sea was quiet and the mind most vulnerable. It is known from sagas and later folklore that Viking sailors often spoke of encounters with the unseen. The sea was not merely water to them. It was alive, haunted, unpredictable. When men slept on open decks under the stars, It was easy to imagine shadows bending, voices whispering, or figures walking just beyond sight. You picture a sailor jerking awake, convinced a pale shape had passed near his cloak. One curious account in Icelandic lore describes men swearing that drowned warriors sometimes climbed aboard during the night, not to harm, but to sit silently among the sleepers. Their presence was a warning. A storm was coming, or a raid would fail. Whether hallucination or tale told later on shore, it reveals how easily the mind wove mystery into fatigue. Scholars remain divided on how literally these stories were believed. Some argue they were campfire tales exaggerated by generations, while others insist sailors genuinely feared spectral visitors. The absence of daylight and the constant rocking of the ship likely blurred perception, making dreams and waking visions difficult to separate. Looking at the crew around you, their eyes wide and half dark, you understand how thin the line must have been. You watch as one sailor stirs, clutching an amulet at his chest. His lips move, muttering a name you cannot hear. Another pulls his cloak higher over his head, as though hiding from unseen eyes. Their movements betray a kind of fear not caused by cold or hunger, but by something imagined, or perhaps sensed, that lingers in the silence. An odd tidbit of folklore says crews sometimes left small offerings on the deck before sleep, crumbs of bread, drops of ale, even a scrap of dried fish, meant for whatever spirits prowled nearby. The gesture was part superstition, part bargaining. Better to give the ghost its due than risk its anger. You picture men fumbling with their rations in the dark, whispering as they set them down, then lying back with hearts a little calmer. The atmosphere aboard shifts with these beliefs. Every creak of timber becomes suspicious, every flicker of moonlight across the water a sign. Exhausted bodies cling to sleep, but minds bristle with unease. Some men twitch awake at nothing, convinced they heard a voice. Others dream of faces leaning close, only to wake in panic. Yet still they endure, half laughing in the morning at their own fear, half convinced the spirits are real. The sensations are vivid even for you. You feel the weight of unseen eyes on your back, the hush pressing in as though something waits just beyond the rail. The sound of waves seems quieter, the wind sharper, as if the world itself conspires to confirm the sailor's fears. You draw your cloak tighter, though it does nothing against the chill creeping from within. And then, gradually, exhaustion wins again. The men settle, charms clutched, cloaks drawn high. Dreams return, though whether they hold ghosts or hearth fires, none can say. What matters is that even haunted sleep is still sleep, and the body demands it. You lie with them, heart thudding, ears straining for whispers you pray not to hear. The night remains long, the sea remains dark, and between reality and vision you hover with them uncertain, uneasy, but still alive. The pale light of morning finally creeps across the deck. Frost clings to every plank, glittering faintly as though the sea itself had dusted the ship in shards of glass. One by one the sailors stir from their restless sleep. They do not rise refreshed far from it. Instead they groan, stretch stiff limbs, and blink against the cold air. The night has left its mark, aches in shoulders pressed against wood, numbness in fingers curled around weapons, and faces drawn tight from uneasy dreams. We know from accounts of daily life at sea that Viking crews often began their mornings stiff and sore. The lack of bedding, the damp planks, and the constant cold ensured that no man woke without complaint. Imagine the chorus. Coughs rattling, joints cracking, curses muttered half-heartedly, as men tried to shake life back into their bodies. You can almost hear it now, a ragged symphony of discomfort greeting the day. One curious note in later sagas suggests that morning complaints were almost ritualized. Men would compare who slept worst, boasting in reverse about the misery they endured. I froze harder than you, one might say, while another countered. I had rats at my feet all night. Grim humor was the salve they used to face another day. You smile faintly, picturing warriors grumbling like old men, finding camaraderie in aches. Not all scholars agree on how much genuine rest these men found between nights. Some argue they adjusted, bodies numb to hardship, while others insist their exhaustion accumulated dangerously, wearing down health and morale. The truth may lie between, but the scene before you suggests fatigue that never fully lifted. Each dawn was less about renewal and more about dragging the body forward. You watch as one sailor rubs his lower back, grimacing. Another flexes his hands, cracking knuckles stiff with cold. A third scratches at his scalp, muttering curses at lice that tormented him even in dreams. The complaints overlap, forming a grumbling chorus that oddly binds them together. In discomfort they find unity. An odd anecdote from folklore describes sailors joking that their joints creaked louder than the ship's timbers in the morning. You hear the truth in it now. The chorus of groans almost matches the groan of wood beneath your feet. The ship and its crew alike are weary, both tested by the endless night. The smell of morning is sour, sweat dried into wool, stale breath, the faint reek of rodents. Yet it mingles with something sharper than salt air, the promise of day. The men pull themselves up, cloaks dragging, and begin to stretch. Their movements are sluggish, but necessary, each one coaxing blood back into frozen limbs. Despite the complaints, no one lingers too long. Survival demands action. Weapons are checked, ropes inspected, sails adjusted. Yet even as they work, mutters of the night's misery continue. Who had the worst dream? Whose cloak was wettest? Whose toes were most numb? It becomes a kind of shared ritual, the way they stitch themselves back together. You crouch among them, feeling your own shoulders ache, your back sore from hard planks. The discomfort is real, but so is the camaraderie. In their shared groans lies proof of endurance. Each man survived another night, and by voicing his pain he declares victory over it. And so morning begins not with cheer but with grumbles, stretching, and the slow acceptance of another day. Their aches are badges, their mutters a chorus of resilience. You rise with them, weary yet still moving forward, carried by the same stubborn will. The groans fade as morning hardens into day. Cloaks are shaken out, weapons strapped back to belts, and the men resume their places. Yet as you look around the deck, you sense something deeper than mere routine. These nights of cold, damp, and restless sleep have bound the crew together in ways invisible but enduring. Enduring bonds of hardship, this is what they carry long after the voyage ends. It is clear from saga traditions and historical records that Viking crews prized loyalty and brotherhood. Survival at sea demanded it. But beyond oaths and shared battles, nights of shivering together, of scratching lice, of clutching weapons and half-dreams forged connections as strong as iron. You see it in the way men nudge each other awake, in the way they laugh at shared complaints, in the silent trust that allowed one to sleep while another kept watch. One curious anecdote from later Icelandic storytelling describes a crew who, years after their voyage, could still recall every detail of each other's sleeping habits, who snored loudest, who muttered prayers, who kicked in his dreams. They remembered with laughter, turning misery into cherished memory. Such intimacy, born of hardship, became part of their identity. Scholars still debate whether these bonds lasted beyond voyages, shaping communities back home. Some argue crews disbanded quickly, men returning to farms and families, while others believe friendships at sea endured for life, echoed in sagas and poetry. The lack of certainty leaves space for imagination, but watching these sailors, you sense truth in the latter. Shared suffering has a way of outliving distance. The men now stand shoulder to shoulder, not as raiders or rowers, but as brothers forged in sleepless nights. The cold taught them dependence, the damp demanded patience, the silence forced them into trust. Even rats, fleas, and restless dreams became common foes, enemies they fought together without weapons, only with endurance. An odd detail from folklore suggests some sailors carved runes into the planks where they slept, marking their spots as their own. Long after the voyage, those runes remained, silent signatures of men who survived side by side. You run your hand across the boards, half expecting to feel faint scratches left by tired hands. Even if no marks remain, the idea lingers, proof that nights aboard were not forgotten. The ship creaks forward, and the men shake off their weariness. Yet the memory of shared hardship lingers in their voices, their laughter, their glances. They know what they endured together, and that knowledge is its own kind of treasure. Gold fades, silver tarnishes, but the memory of surviving endless winter nights at sea becomes a legacy passed in stories. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling yourself part of that brotherhood. You too have lain on damp planks, scratched at phantom lice, breathed frost into the air. You too have heard songs fading into dreams, charms clutched against ghosts, laughter chasing away fear. You too have endured the long nights, and now you rise with them into day. These bonds, woven from hardship, will echo in halls for generations. They will be told not only in sagas of raids and battles, but in quiet stories of how men survived the nights, their closeness, their complaints, their stubborn will to keep sleeping, keep waking, keep living. And so the tale of how Viking sailors slept on harsh winter seas is not only about discomfort, but about resilience, connection, and the strange intimacy forged by endurance. The nights were cruel, yet they created a brotherhood as enduring as the sea itself. The story drifts now toward its end, and you feel the pace soften, the edges blur. Imagine the ship still rocking gently, the sea whispering against its sides. The men are no longer restless figures scratching in the cold, but shadows fading into memory, their hardships carried away on the tide. Your breathing slows, the details of damp wool and icy planks dissolve, replaced by the simple rhythm of waves. You picture the sailors safe on shore at last, cloaks drying by firelight, voices softer, laughter gentler. Their bond endures, but their suffering fades, tucked away like a story told only at night. Let the images grow distant now. The frost that once bit at their fingers melts. The lice that once crawled into every seam vanish. The ghosts and whispers fade with the mist. What remains is only the quiet strength of men who endured, and the sense of calm left behind when their tale is finished. Breathe slowly, in and out, as though rocked by the same cradle of the sea. Feel the weight of your own blankets, not damp, not heavy, but warm and steady. Let the creak of the ship become the quiet hum of sleep around you. The voyage is done, the story has ended, the men rest, and so do you. Close your eyes, drift deeper, and let the silence carry you away. Sweet dreams.